All right, Japan. Japanese history is extremely cyclical, and we touched on it a couple different times. It gets started much, much later than a lot of the other civilizations that we talk about because of its geographical location. It is an archipelago, a chain of islands off the coast of mainland Asia in the Pacific Ocean. And it takes a long time for not only people to get there, but also due to the geography of Japan, it takes them to settle and get unified. So it's only in 500 AD, so a good starting point for Japan is think of the fall of Rome. All right, fall of Rome, 476 to 500, when the Franks are forming their empire, is when Japan starts. That's what we got going on. So we got the fall of Rome. In the Byzantine Empire, it's the heyday of Emperor Justinian and his one God, one religion, one empire. Transfer that over to Asia, it's about the time of the Tang Dynasty. The Tang Dynasty is going to be big for Japan. And using Korea as a bridge, one of the clans, the tribes of the Japanese, worked with the Pache dynasty of Korea. All right, instead of Christina Park, we have Christina, Pache. And from the Paches, the Japanese learned iron making steel. And the Yamato family will have steel weapons. They will be able to defeat and to unify all of Japan. And more technology is going to come from China as time goes on. So the family, am I going too fast? I see you guys are writing. All right. The Yamato family will become the founders of unified China, and they will set themselves up as the only single dynasty in all of world history. Still to this day, there is a Yamato on the throne. Yes, ma'am. Did I say China? We are in Japan, yes. The only single dynasty in world history is the Yamato family of Japan. I'm slowly getting my head back in the game here. The Emperor of Japan will be seen as a descendant of the sun gods. The most powerful visible symbol in their world is the sun goddess, which is kind of interesting given the fact that Japan is a very patriarchal, male-driven society. Their most powerful god is a goddess. And so, also at this time, the Japanese will come up with their religion, which is called Shintoism. And Shinto, simply defined, means way of the gods, the many polytheistic gods. The same ones we always have. God of the wind, God of the rain, God of the sun, God of the moon, and all that good stuff. And this will show itself up in Japanese social hierarchy. The Japanese define their family relationships in something known as the we, or the UJI. It is their clan, the family clan. The Hondas, the Toyotas, the Suzukis are all clans, modern-day multinational corporation names. And when choosing your rank as a noble or a commoner, you chose a powerful symbol in nature that represented your family name. So one of the leading families is the Fujiwara family. Their ancient descendant was Mount Fuji, the biggest volcano in Japan. So the size or the powerful imagery of the natural object kind of accentuated your family's prominence, if that makes sense. By the early 600s, as we get started in the European world deep into the Middle Ages, right about the time that Muhammad is beginning to think about religion in the Islamic world, many Japanese students will leave Japan and they will go to China to study. These are your aristocratic young men. They will go to China, they will study for a period of years, and then they bring everything back to Japan. And they set it down, and they kind of look at it, and they examine it, and then they kind of pick and choose what they're going to work on. Unlike Peter the Great, who tries to do everything all at once, unlike Joseph Stalin, who tried to do everything all at once, the Japanese are very selective. And you're only going to take something that fits a definite Japanese need, something that we need, something that will help us. And the Japanese are some of the greatest borrowers in world history, the Japanese and the Romans. They will take ideas from other people and then morph or adapt them to fit a Japanese need. Not a whole lot is exclusively created per se, but they take and they adapt and they make it fit them. And so this will take place over around a 350 year period. Again, it's simultaneous with the Tang and the Song dynasties. It is the spread of Islam. And over in the Americas, we have the Mayans, Maya and Miguel, that's going on culturally in the world. In 700, we're going to backtrack a little bit. 700, the Japanese build their first capital city. And Japanese history is kind of connotated by the name of the capital city at the time. Here, it's the city of Nara. And it's here where the emperor is going to try and control the whole show. He is the divine emperor, one of these hands-on emperor guys. And he is advised by very powerful and influential Japanese families. The most notable is the Fujiwara family. And the Fujiwaras make a lot of people jealous. Oops. Mr. Brown, sir. Did you want me to see if she's in her office real fast? All right. I'll let you know right away. I'll have her call you right away, sir. You're welcome. It was not what I expected. It was all the philosophical, happy stuff. I was more of the practical, nitty-gritty. So today was kind of a rough one for me. You know what I'm saying? All right. Thank you, sir. All right. All right, I need a volunteer. Harrison, great. Go see if Miss Hips is in her office and ask her to come down here real fast. It's this one right here. Ms. Wilson. All right. Powerful family, the Fujiwaras, begin to exert their influence. And what they did was kind of slimy. Key thing to note, one of the big differences, I would love it if we had a comparison of Japanese and like medieval European feudalism. I mean, hopefully we would crush that. One of the big differences is there was never any antagonism or threat of assassination for the emperor. The emperor is always there. We don't overthrow the emperor. He is divine. There's not a lot of friction between him and his underlings. The underlings, however, could fight each other all the time.
She's coming.
She's coming? All right. Yes, ma'am.
If you did compare and contrast Japanese and European feudalism, what would be a difference?
The big difference is the emperor in Japan always stayed the same. All right. Miss Hipsman, Mr. Brown called looking for you. He needs your exclusive help, ma'am. I'm sorry. That's on tape. Thank you, Harrison. So, a couple differences. Number one, there was never any overthrow of the emperor, where in Europe that happened all the time.
The emperor's like, damn.
There are dynasties, but there's more than one emperor in Europe or king in Europe, where in Japan there's always only one. The other big thing would be the idea of the shogun. Right? There's no shogun in Europe. A European king was the king. He didn't have a second in command. The third and final thing would be the way taxes were collected and distributed. In Japan, taxes were collected. They all will go to the shogun here in a minute, and he will redistribute them to his population. Whereas in Europe, everybody took a small percentage on the way up to the king. So the king got a little bit of money from many sources, if that makes sense. So, the Fujiwara family, however, know they can never overthrow or usurp the emperor, so they have their daughters marry Yamato's son. So they try to marry into the royal family. For about 100 or 150 years, people begin to figure this out. They get angry at the Fujiwaras. And an emperor said, no, I don't need you telling me what to do. I'm going to rule alone. So even though the Yamatos had some strong and some weak emperors, they had the ebb and the flow, the family always remained the same. Also, there was no civil service exam in Japan. Remember, Japan, it wasn't what you knew, it was who you knew. Everybody who had a family member working in the government, their son got a governmental job. So China, while it was much bigger and had many more people, was more efficiently run because the Japanese government was so top-heavy with bureaucracy. You had redundant jobs because your buddy's son had to have a job. There was no civil service exam. If you guys remember the example that I used, in China, if Christina gets a good job, does a good job on the exam, to get a nice job, what else does she need? My recommendation. In Japan, that simply did not happen. By 839, think of right at the end of Charlemagne, when the Treaty of Versailles is being, or the Treaty of Verdun is being signed by his idiot grandsons, is the last Japanese delegation to China. They say, you know what? We've learned just about everything that we can. We're now going to spend the next 350 years assimilating it and making it a part of Japanese culture. Is everybody good? All right. Boom. Next period is Heian Japan, where we get a new capital city. And this is going to run from, like, say, 800 up to 1185. So in your minds, think of it as a couple different ways. Number one, the growth and the spread of Islam. It's the same time as the West African empires, Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. And it is also, did I say the growth and the spread of Islam? Did I say that? Yeah. Going up to about the launch of the First Crusade is very close to this point. The end of the Dark Ages of Europe. So, oh, look, I just put it up there. Should have read my own slide. All right. What Japan learns during this period is things that they borrowed from China really don't work for them. The best example is the Chinese tax system. The Chinese redistributed land to peasants in bigger or smaller land plots every 6 years. Taxes in China were paid in several different ways. And so for Japan, this was too cumbersome. It took too much paperwork, too much drawing and redrawing of boundaries. And they go, so this is just not efficient. It just doesn't work for us. So the Japanese, on their own, are going to come up with the concept of Japanese feudalism. And this is the continuity in Japanese history from about 790, 800, up until Admiral Perry shows up in the 1850s. Japan is going to be run by classic feudalism, just the way it exists in Europe and in China. I'm not going to redistribute land, but as the emperor, I'm going to give a portion to Mia and a portion to Abigail and a portion to Meg and a portion to Yasmin. And they're going to govern that for me. So, during this time, the emperor sometimes is nothing but a figurehead. He's a guy up in the palace doing whatever a guy up in the palace does. Drinks sake, you know, trims bonsai trees, you know, rakes gravel, doing whatever, watching goldfish. He's off doing his stuff. The real power will lie in the shogun, who is the head military official, the head general. This is how feudalism is going to develop. Shogun is the actual guy calling the shots. He is the executive governing. Everything is done in the name of the emperor, but the emperor is doing whatever it is that he does. Assisting the shogun are upper lords, large landowners called daimyos. These daimyos are the equivalent of an upper lord in Europe. The daimyo is a samurai, but he is a samurai manager. He's the head honcho. He has a big portion of land, like Orange County. To help the daimyo govern Orange County, he has smaller knights or samurai. So Isaac governs Carborough. Dirk governs Chapel Hill. Avery gets Hillsborough. Abigail gets, you know, northern Orange County. Harrison gets Rougemont. I'm just making up kind of territories and time. You know, Angelo gets Chapel Hill east of Martin Luther King Boulevard, and Quentin gets it west of Chapel Hill Boulevard. Or Mia is the samurai of the Highlands. Christina gets Windchime, and Olivia gets Claremont. You have a small territory where you answer to the daimyo, who answers to the shogun. It is a chain of command. Your salary is the land you are given to live on. You police the peasants, you keep bad guys out, and you collect taxes. You are in charge. The economy is pretty much all, what do we do until the Industrial Revolution? We farm stuff, all right? So you're going to pay your taxes in food, right? That's how it's done. So the governing concept is feudalism, but the small, local, little farm or village is called, someone said, would you say, Greta? Minoralism, all right? The samurai is in charge of the manor. The daimyo is in charge of the whole county. The shogun is in charge of the entire empire. All right, boom. Think of like a Russian nesting doll. Boom, 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 boom. Or sticking doll. Cold going away. I can use accent again. Much happy. Just to stop. All right. As always, the peasants are poor, and they do 90% of the work, and that's just how it is. They're also the majority of the population. Big thing happens, though, during high end. The Japanese were trying to write in Chinese characters, and they wanted to express themselves. They wanted to write Shakespearean sonnets, and they wanted to go in iambic pentameter. And they go, man, you know what would be really cool to write?
Poetry.
A haiku. I could really write me the snot out of a haiku here, Dirk. There's only one problem.
Don't have a writing system.
I don't have a writing system. Chinese characters don't mesh with Japanese words. So in 951, a princess has her scholars create the Japanese kana or the kana, their writing system. And I always think this has got to be one of the most difficult things in the world to do. Fellas, with 20 of us here after school on Tuesday, we're going to develop a writing system. Hop to it. Just, It's like, you know, Gene Roddenberry inventing Klingon or the Elfish language from like Tolkien or whatever. How do you do that and make it communicable? Well, they do. So that's a big cultural flowering. And it leads to the two most famous authors of Japan are women, Lady Murasaki Shikibu and Sei Shonagon. And they write the two classic works about life in this period of Japan. They're kind of satirical, right? Like, you know, Sir Thomas More's Utopia or Aesop's Fables, because you don't want to get into trouble because they are women. So a lot of the cultural record comes from the Pillow Book and the Tale of Genji about a life of an aristocratic woman living in the capital city. And it's, God, I'm forgetting the term from it right now. What's love from afar? God, I say it all the time. Courtly love. It's courtly love, all right? It's love from afar. It's Lancelot and Guinevere. That's what they all... You don't have a lot of choice. Society was very regimented and strict, and you did the same thing day after day after day, kind of like going to high school. So, all right, boom. Near the end, we get Mr. Melega's favorite Japanese character. I'm not going to say it. You guys can say it. There we go. You're now on YouTube saying Minamoto Yoritomo. All right, his name is fun to say, and it rhymes. He is the first official shogun in 1192. All right, so it's the height of the crusading period in Western Europe. We're getting into the High Middle Ages, where we have the Pope versus Emperor conflict going on in Europe. Here we have the shogun taking over. In the Americas, we have the heyday of the Aztecs and the Incas are going to be going on when Minamoto Yoritomo shows up. And he creates the concept of the Bakufu, which is the 10th government. What it says is that these capital cities are a corruptive influence. You get in there, you forget the people, you forget your job. So the capital is wherever I pitch my tent. I'm going to stay out of there so I am not corrupted. During this period are the two major Mongol invasions. During Yoritomo, the Yoritomo period is when Genghis Khan his horde will spread across Asia and Europe. Then Kublai Khan tries to attack Japan 2 times, 1274 and 1281. Both times his entire fleets are sunk by a hurricane, and he says, well, Japan can just stay. Oh, we've conquered everything else. The heck with them. And this brings us to where we're going to stay again. It's cyclical. It's the same thing. And each time we get a Minamoto Yoritomo or a smaller shogun or an emperor, the Japanese always go back to a very small, functional bureaucracy where they have a person in charge of collecting taxes. They have the people making and issuing laws. And they have the samurai policing the people. So the Japanese were an earlier edition of the small bureaucracies that the age of absolutism emperors are going to use. A couple guys we can meet with every single day. Last, era we're going to see for a long time is the Ashikaga Era. The Ashikaga Era is the European Renaissance through the age of exploration and the triangle trade. And the Japanese are experiencing similar problems that they have before. Well, this is getting too big. We need to overhaul it. So they strip it down. And they come back to those same 3 offices that we talk about again and again and again. Well, haven't we done this before? Yes. How did we fix it? Let's go back to that. And the problem is, Just like we saw in other parts of the world, the feudal plots, the pieces of land that each samurai and daimyo are being given, are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Population's growing. Always the population growing. That's a little West Side Story for you guys. You guys know what's going on. All right. So, how are we going to handle this? And we have an emperor who says, I don't want a shogun. I should be in control myself. I'm going to run this ship. And so Ashikaga is a shogun who works with the emperor. And they help create a new Japanese economy. And this is big. Before this time, all the Shah artisans on Miya's feudal manor could only make and sell things for her land. Let's say Miya's got a really good blacksmith who can put a metal handle on a shovel. So when you're digging rocks out, the wooden handle doesn't snap in half. Is that something every farmer might want? Yes. Well, now Miya's blacksmith can make a bunch of those, and she can take them and sell them around Japan. It is an open market where you can take your stuff, make the emperor's cut, and then you can begin to travel around and sell it to those who need it and keep the profit. This is where big samurai families begin to transition because they hoard or recruit the most skilled artisans in Japan. Honda, Toyota, Suzuki, those guys. But then we get to this period where we just keep going around and around and around, and it's why we leave Japan for a long time, because they're doing the exact same thing. Between 1600 and 1853 is the Japanese version of the Dark Ages. Nobody goes in and nobody comes out. They believe they had perfected civilization. There's nothing more that can be added. It's like the guy I pointed to you over there, the U.S. patent clerk in 1890, who says, well, we don't need a patent office because everything that could be invented has been. I'd like to see him beam himself up here today. He'd pee himself. All right,
That light thing.
There's the light thing. Well, think about in your lifetimes, the iPod, concept of the iPod, a musical device. There was nothing wrong with it, but Apple refined it and tweaked it and made it, bigger, and then they made it really, 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 really small, and it could hold more and more and more music and do more and more and more things, and now we're putting it on a watch. Was there anything wrong with the iPod? No, but we've spent so much time refining it and making it better. The iPod, which I still use, I don't even know how to make a playlist, is now pretty much obsolete. And it's what, 8 years old? He would just, he wouldn't know what to do. He'd just pass out. Think of Captain America running out of the hospital and he gets to Times Square where he grew up and is like, whoa, this didn't look like it used to. All right. All right, history becomes cyclical. And people out there in YouTube land, I'm copyrighting that little iPod example, so just saying. I like that. Boom, epiphany.
Are you actually copyrighted?
No, but I should. I don't know that I can since Apple invented it, but it was a great learning analogy. Also at this time, the Japanese had no fun because their parents said, Harrison, no play. All you have to do is study. And if that were true, Japan would have been even more boring than it was. But a no play is a great piece of cultural flowering where the Japanese were able to present plays or moral stories, like in Aesop's fable, by telling stories, or later on by doing a dance. And the language became the movement of the hands and the movement of a dancer, who wore a big mask for facial expression, a nice parallel to the ancient Greek theater, the concept of the trilogy. Most famous story to come out of the no plays would be the concept of the fisherman and the golden fish. Fisherman says, you let me go, I'll give you a gift. The fisherman goes home. The wife always wants more. Finally, the fish says, you know what? You are so greedy. I'm taking everything. You know, you figure out the message and the moral of the story. So, then we fast forward. Near the end of this period, in the cyclical area, there are some small changes. We get Mr. Tokugawa Yasu, the patient reunifier of Japan. And he is the guy that redraws the Japanese boundaries into those 3 concentric rings. And he will found a new city called Edo. It is now Tokyo, where his most loyal supporters were close to him. Second ring were his, close friends and family members. Way on the outer reaches were the people he didn't like or who fought against him. So to attack him, you had to go through his close family members and then his best friends. And that's okay for a concept of organization, but what he really comes up with is his own unique blend of the hostage system. Now, Tokugawa is an equivalent. He exists in the age of absolutism. So what fuels the age of absolutism?
Money.
Money. Where are we getting this money? A little bit before the Industrial Revolution. Colonization and mercantilism, where we're going to make money for the mother country. Well, Japan wasn't going anywhere. So they're looking at themselves, but his rule is absolute. Nobody questions Tokugawa. He defeats any enemy that comes near the emperor. The emperor's like, Tokugawa, you just go do your thing, brother. And the hostage system is what Louis used. It's what Peter the Great used. But Tokugawa does something a little different. 1 year, you live in the capital with him. The next year, you go out to your plot of land. The daimyo, the samurai go out. But your family remains behind. And if I hear there's a rebellion or some nasty tinkering, your family disappears. And the positive that comes out of that is that the daimyo, going back and forth from their feudal plots of land, realize we have no infrastructure. We have no roads. We have no bridges. We can't get anywhere. We are so isolated. So come on in. The Japanese at this period begin to totally reform. Yes, ma'am. Need me?
Excuse me.
Yes.
Mr. Brown's calling on radio.
Oh my God. Isn't that after school? Going on after you? What's he need? Do we know?
I'm getting him back. Sorry, kids.
You are mean, Miss Wilson. You are mean.
I love you.
It's all right. She's going out to YouTube land. Teacher shenanigans. I think I know how to edit it. You guys heard me blowing my nose during podcasts. All right, I'm like, as I was saying, So anyway, what was I saying?
You couldn't see you in the video.
Creates the infrastructure.
You couldn't? I thought that I was there. No. Oh well.
You're just kind of like a dark figure.
That doesn't matter. That's I'm dark. I am this. That's fine. I'm sorry. Abigail, what was I saying?
The creating infrastructure.
Created infrastructure. The guys traveling, they build those roads, they build bridges, and it reconnects the different regions of Japan with each other. So it creates, in a sense, a national Japanese economy. Once again, going back to my Georgia peaches and my Vermont maple syrup. Now we can take maple syrup south and we can take peaches north. It opens up and integrates the Japanese economy. The problem is, only samurai could hold governmental jobs. Social hierarchy throughout Japanese history is extremely rigid, almost as rigid as the caste system in India. Only samurai, only rich guys, only aristocrats get the jobs. But you are studied, and the better your managerial skills are, the more responsibility you are given. So like the biblical parable or whatever, analogy, fable you want to make, to, if you can handle a small job, I'm going to give you more. And when you master that, I'm going to give you more. And if you stink at it and you don't progress, then you're going to stay where you are. Think of the different levels of the civil service exam in China: the village, the mid-sized city, and the large metropolitan town. But everything's kind of stable. All right, we got things rolling. So for the next several hundred years, the door is closed. We just don't care. All right, we're going to do our thing, and you can like it or not. All right. Finally, we get to the Meiji Restoration, 1868 to 1912. And it's here where Commodore Perry just sails himself into Tokyo Bay with his big smoking dragon. What's he got in his hands? His little smoking dragon. He's hanging on the Mushu. And the Japanese are forced to sign the Treaty of Friendship. This is the heyday of imperialism, and nobody had claimed Japan yet. So the Americans said, well, we're going to go get it. All right, that's what we are going to do. And the Japanese are forced to look at themselves in the mirror and realize we thought we had perfected society, and dude's got a smoking dragon out there floating. We have got to totally flip everything we've done. And for Japan, this is a real exciting period, because in 30 to 50 years, they are going to hit the fast forward button. Heck, they're going to the scene selection button. And they are going to go from medieval feudalism all the way to a modern society quicker and faster than anybody else in the world had possibly done. Now, they had help. England, Germany, the United States had done it. But the Japanese, and I think I put it up here, they have the ability to sacrifice short-term gain for themselves for long-term result for their children and grandchildren. And overnight, they go from, think of what Russia's doing at this time. All right, you heard the lectures last couple days. Russia was still trying to become industrial. And the Japanese do it in 50 years. So, once again, just like they did way back at the formative period during the Tang Dynasty, young men go out and they study. They go to the United States, they go to Great Britain, they go to Germany, they go to France, and they bring all that stuff back. And once again, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Let's pick and choose what we're going to do. We can't do everything. Let's pick what we need right now, get that done, and then go to the next step. Most people, we're going to use Russia, like Peter the Great, like Stalin, try to do everything all at once. You guys hanging in there? You guys need a break? All right, Greta's yawning. Yasmin, you look like you're fading. You guys good? You sure? I mean, if you just tell me, I'm good. I'm good till 5:30 today. So, all right, roll train. All right, speaking of trains, one of the things they wanted was steam engines. How to build industrial factories. Let's use railroads. Let's get telegraph lines. Let's open up and be able to communicate. And once they figure out what they want, they go to stage 2, which is the formation of the Japanese zaibatsu. And a zaibatsu is a Japanese corporation. First one is Mitsubishi, who is a small shipper, and then he builds a bank. I think of it as the Bank of America. All right? And here again, we give up short-term gain for long-term success. We do it in 30 years. Was it zero to hero? Old Hercules, all right? From nothing to something in a very short time. At this time, comes with industrial integrated society. Some of the students come back and said, Western technological development happens because of their legal and their political process. There is an incentive for working hard. People don't do it just to do it. They know there's going to be a benefit. So the emperor is going to write a constitution for the people. And he picks the German model because Bismarck wrote it, and it gives great power to the emperor or the king. In the late 1890s, Japan wants to strut their stuff. Think about it, whether you play an instrument or you're an athlete, you can play that piano piece. You can practice it every now and then, constantly. But you really want to go and have a recital and have other people hear your music. Or if you're an athlete, yes, scrimmaging is great, but sooner or later you want to play against a team in a different jersey so you can see if your stuff really works. Well, the Japanese have done it. They've been playing an inter-squad scrimmage. They've been playing the piano piece only to themselves. Let's go take this show on the road. And the one thing the Japanese don't have is raw materials. They just don't. Who does? China. China's also close by. So the Japanese will go to war with China 1894, 1895, and they win. And the Japanese get from China trade agreements and access to mineral rights. The Japanese say, if any of our industrial property is threatened, we are allowed to bring in our military to protect it. China has no choice. And the Chinese come in traditional Chinese robes, and the Japanese show up in like Wall Street business suits. Your power blue suit with the gray pinstripes and the bowler hat, saying, look at you Chinese, you were the mother country and now you're, well, look at you. All right, we're modern. You're still stuck in the past. And that really shakes up China, who gets carved up during the age of imperialism. Because of the Japanese treatment of workers, there's the famous Boxer Rebellion that the Japanese military comes in and brutally puts down, turning people's mind against Japan. And the big problem for the Japanese is nobody in the West says, hey, good job, your military's kicked butt because you just be like China. And everybody does that. So they go, well, we want to play against a varsity opponent. We want to get one of them Europeans. So they pick on Russia. And they sink the Russian fleet in 1906. And they want people to say, yes, you trounced Russia. But once again, nobody cares because it's Russia. And then you sink their ships and then you declare a war. If you really want to do it, guys, declare a war and then sink your ships, or their ships. President Teddy Roosevelt gets a Nobel Peace Prize for drafting a treaty that heavily favors Japan when it comes to Russia. But Japan is still on the receiving end of unfair trade treaties coming from the West. And Japan is angry. You will recognize us for what we do, by gosh, by golly, by gee. But nobody does. And then World War I happens. And at the end of World War I, there are only two industrial economies in the world, the United States and Japan. And Japan gets a seat at the Paris Peace Conference. Germany and Russia didn't even get invited, and they fought in the war. But Japan is there. And they get colonies, German colonies in Asia. And so the Japanese really take off because they need those raw materials. What crushes them is in 1925, there is a massive earthquake that just destroys everything. And the Japanese have to start rebuilding from scratch. They got to start all over again. And just as they get finished, a couple problems hit. There is a confluence in society where the old traditional Japanese were having to deal with the new young people version. So you have, it's the Tom Cruise movie, The Last Samurai. People wearing kimonos and silk, and then the young kids wearing saddle shoes and blue jeans, dancing the Charleston, listening to their iPod. the young Japanese were beginning to lose respect for the old traditional Japanese ways. And it doesn't fit well in Japanese society. Also, the Great Depression hits. Kablam. And as the Great Depression hits, Japan is going to recover faster than anyone else because they turn militaristic. And by 1934, when we are right in the middle of the Great Depression, the Japanese have already rebounded. And they do it by building massive military technology, planes, tanks, ships, things that cost a lot of money and put a lot of people to work. 1931, they invade Manchuria and blow up their own railroad. One of the things that helps them out a great deal is China is in the middle of their civil war. And while Europe is struggling with Hitler and figuring out its own nonsense, the Japanese are pretty much given free hand to do whatever they want to rape and pillage in Korea and China. They join the Axis powers, and they begin to revive the power of the samurai, the whole idea they wanted to get rid of in 1853. They build a warrior cult around the emperor. And they're angry that their success has never been recognized in the world. No one's ever said, attaboy, good job. Japanese immigrants are closed off in Western countries. And Japanese products were so good that they were so expensive, nobody would import them. And the Japanese say, you know what? We've had enough. On December 7th, 1941, they attacked the United States, marking our entry into the war. And in December 8th, they attacked many other places in Asia, turning the conflict into a truly world war. Bunch of battles in the Pacific. The war ends on August 6, 1945, when the atomic bomb Little Boy is dropped on Hiroshima, killing about 170,000 people. The Japanese are asked to surrender. They say no. So on August 9th, Fat Man is dropped on the backside of a mountain in Nagasaki, and the Japanese will surrender September 2nd, 1945, ending World War II, a conflict that will claim 69 million lives in 6.5 years. After the war, Japan is pretty much turned into an American protectorate. They're not allowed to have a military. We have more military bases in Japan than anywhere in the world besides the United States. We got Army, we got Marine, we got Navy, we have Air Force. We are, in effect, their military. And we begin to rebuild Japanese society. Hirohito is allowed to remain the emperor, but a governing democracy must be put in place. And because the Japanese are a homogeneous society, they're all Japanese, they were educated, there's 90–95% literacy, and they had an industrial economy before the war. Democracy will flourish until the 1980s. The Japanese, especially with the automotive and electronics industry, become a major world power broker where they are today. And that's Japan. That's in Japan, Rudy. All right. Toy Story 2. All right. Any questions? Yes, sir.
So you said each era